Real Talk USA.
It's my house, come on, turn it up.
The hour where the U.S. mission to the African Union comes to you through Afro FM 105.3 to highlight the United States partnership in Africa. Current issues will be discussed. Guests will engage on a variety of topics ranging from politics to jazz. Co-hosted by AUL Solomon of Afro FM and Chris Meade of USAU. The show will air every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. Feel free to participate by sending messages to the USAU social media sites www.usau.usmission.gov or www.facebook.com/USAU and follow USAU on twitter.com/USAU.
Just relax. Welcome to my house.
Real Talk USA.
Welcome to my house. It's my house.
Hello everyone, this is our weekly show Real Talk USA on 105.3 Afro FM, and it's me, AUL Solomon, with
Mazgabwa Taddesa. Good afternoon, everybody. And today we have with us Mr. Ken Isaacs. He's the U.S. candidate for Director General of the International Organization for Migration, or IOM. Welcome to Addis. Welcome to Real Talk USA, Mr. Isaacs.
Thank you. It's good to be with you today, and it's good to be back in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, which is like my second home country.
Oh, so it's not your first time here?
No, I lived here for 3 years.
Oh, wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your stay in Addis?
So my wife and our two sons moved here in 1988, and we lived here until March of 1991, till right before the dirt fell. And during that time, I was involved in drilling wells and setting up a water development program, and I had the opportunity to travel all over the country. And since then, I've been back to Ethiopia many times, and I was just here 7 or 8 weeks ago.
Wonderful. Can you give us a little bit of background about yourself? You know, what you did. You know,
how did I get here?
Yes, please.
Well, so I have worked with an organization named Samaritan's Purse for 30 years. And in that work, I've been involved in development activities and emergency relief activities. And when I started with the organization, it was a small group, about 25 people. And I was actually the first person to go abroad, and it was here to Ethiopia. And my wife and my two sons came with me. So I had one son that went to Bingham Academy for a year, and then he graduated. The other son graduated from the International Community School.
I see.
And he came and did his last year of high school here. And so anyway, in my work with Samaritan's Purse, that led me to be the director of the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance with USAID, and I was in that position for about a year and a half. And I came back to work for Samaritan's Purse and liked it. And the organization, we just kept growing it and growing it and growing it. And today, it probably has close to 5,000 staff working around the world. And it has a sizable budget, maybe $800 million in the entire organization. And it has, I love this kind of work. I love people. I love working in complex environments. And that's sort of how I got here.
Okay, good to know. Obviously, you follow migration issues very, very closely, and my question to you is, what do you feel are the biggest migration challenges facing the international community now and over the next coming few years?
That's a big question to ask. So migration, it means different things to different countries. But it's a very complicated subject, and yes, I do follow it closely, and I've been involved in responding to major migratory events. For example, Samaritan's Purse was the leading partner for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in receiving all of the refugees that were coming from Turkey into Greece. So we were managing all of that work with UNHCR there. And we've worked with migratory people in the Congo and in Sudan and Darfur and East Sudan and South Sudan and Uganda and just many different areas around the world. In Bangladesh, I just got back from Bangladesh about 2 months ago. But when you look at the world today and you talk about migration, migration to Ethiopia is different than migration is to Bangladesh. And the issues are different. So in Ethiopia, you have refugees that are coming into Ethiopia. You have diaspora that are going out and they want to send money back. You have people trafficking through Ethiopia, passing through, transiting through is a better word. Whereas in, let's say, Bangladesh, they have 10 million people that leave every year and work abroad, and they send $14 billion a year back into the country. So for Bangladesh, the migration issues are going to be, they want their citizens to be safe, they want their citizens to have legal documentation to travel, they want them to have good work contracts, they want them to have an affordable way to send their money back, and then when they come back home after 10 years or however many years, they want to have a reintegration program for them. If you look at Ethiopia, you have a little bit of all of that. Ethiopia certainly has a diaspora. Ethiopia has refugees living in country. Ethiopia has migratory people who are passing through, whether they're going from somewhere to get across the Red Sea to go to Yemen and try to get to Europe, or whether they're coming from another place to move into the interior of Africa. I was speaking this morning to an Ethiopian senior official, and I made the comment that it's almost like Ethiopia has such a mixed pattern of migration, you need like a traffic light to coordinate the movement of people coming through. And but then if you look in Europe today, you see that Europe in 2015 received a lot of refugees. Germany alone, 1 million, and Norway and Sweden, many countries. And in migration, there's a term called safe, orderly, and regular migration. That's what everybody wants to achieve in the international community, is safe, orderly, and regular. And in that instance, regular means legal. It means there's a legal pathway. So if you look back at what happened in 2015 in Europe, that wasn't safe, it wasn't orderly, and it certainly wasn't regular. And Europe is still feeling the consequences of that today. So you're seeing those consequences manifested in changes in election. The Merkel government just had to make a coalition government because they lost the majority. Italy has just had an election and they're changing their government. You're seeing the European Union wanting to become more involved in Africa on, let's call it development or the drivers of migration, because they don't want people coming in an uncontrolled, in an unsafe, and an irregular fashion to the continent. If you look in the United States today, certainly there's a lot of political rhetoric about the wall and, migration and immigrants and, what is the difference between migration and immigrants? And there's a lot of questions. And, a lot of these things lead to, it's not only that people come in a hurried way, but that it leads to human trafficking. It opens up exploitation to people who are traveling and become vulnerable to people around them. They understand these vulnerabilities. They offer them a job. They put them in a foreign country, and then they become an indentured service, either through sexual exploitation or minimally or non-paid labor. Slave trade is seen. So migration is a major global issue. No country on the face of the earth is without migration issues, and every human being that is alive is descended from a migrant. And there are no exceptions. Your descendants migrated from somewhere, my descendants migrated from somewhere. So I think, in my attempt to make a short explanation of it, migration is very complicated and it affects everybody.
And what do you think are the biggest migration challenges facing us in the coming years, especially in the near future?
So the challenges are different in different places again, but in Africa right now, some of the biggest challenges for migration, there's the south-north, where people are trying to get up into the Mediterranean at great risk to their lives, and thousands of people have died trying to do this. There is, governments are trying to hold people forcibly back, and that's not a very good situation. In Africa, you've got, though, country to country, east to west migration, south to south migration, however you want to call it. And in West Africa, they have ECOWAS has open borders. I mean, with legal documentation, people can move freely and they can migrate back and forth. I think some of the challenges, the biggest challenges today, are one, that migrants are not seen in a respectful way as they should be seen. And it's easy to see them in a negative way, but yet migrants are necessary in every country in the world. Migratory labor is important. People always relocate. I was talking to somebody, a public official in Switzerland, who told me that if the average Swiss would say, we don't have a migration issue, but yet there are tens of thousands of Swiss who go out of the country and work, and they send money back home. Well, that's a typical model that I described, for Bangladesh and the Philippines too, are countries that are noted for that. But I think trying to establish an environment that allows for safe, orderly, and regular migration. So when I think about migration, I see the world of human rights around the migrants. And I think that every human being is created in the image of God and should be respected. And their human rights should be respected. They should be treated with equality. They should be treated with dignity and with humanity. And then when I look at a country, I recognize that a country has a sovereign right as a state to determine what its domestic migration policy is going to be. So if a country determines that they want 5,000 migrants that year or 500,000, that's their sovereign right to do that. And negotiations can always be made. But I don't think that the two perspectives are in conflict. I think that they're together. And this is really where IOM comes in, because I see IOM's mission as helping people and helping states manage their migration. So this is a long way around answering your question of what the big migration issues are today. But there are massive numbers of people. People are always on the move. And I think that we want to respect them from their human rights perspective. And I think that states need to be assisted in helping manage their migration challenges.
Thank you, sir. I want to clarify what the IOM is first, if you could do that for me, and also what you feel IOM's role should be in the international migration policy more elaborately than what you just said.
So IOM was founded in 1951 at the end of World War II, and its purpose was to help people. It had a different name then, but its purpose was to help people return to the European continent to help rebuild after the war. And they chartered thousands of airplanes and helped millions of people return. Over the years, they have stayed, and they have, because the international community, member states, wanted assistance and support, and they wanted a focal point on issues of migration. So today, IOM is based in Geneva, and it has 169 countries that are member states. And Ethiopia is one of the countries. And I think in Africa, I believe there's 54 countries in Africa, and 53 other countries are member states. And so the states want an organization that has specialized capacity to help meet the humanitarian needs of migrants, to help states figure out their policies on migration, to help collect data and report on migration, and help inform policy around the world on migration. So today there is something in the U.S., or not in the U.S., but in New York at the UN rather, going on called the Global Compact on Migration. And this is a discussion that's trying to bring a framework to what migration is and how the international community thinks that it should be conducted. Africa, interestingly enough, has its own compact discussion going on. And this is interesting, especially to me, because of this open border concept that Africa is using, the way that they're so comfortable in allowing people to move freely back and forth.
These days, conflicts are becoming one of the major issues for migrants to go from one place to another. What do you think for continental blocs like the EU, the African Union, and individual member states in these conflict areas should do to mitigate this irregular migration and conflict resolution in order to keep the people in safe zones?
It's a very complicated question. Thanks for asking me these hard questions. So, I would say the first thing is that you have to take care of the human life. And that's food, and that's water, and that's shelter, and security, and all of those issues. If you look at the world today, there's about 22.5 million refugees, okay? But there is another 40+ million internally displaced people, IDPs, people who have been driven off from their homes because of fighting or insecurity. So that's essentially, you've got 64 million people who are displaced because of insecurity, because of fighting, because their lives are at risk. What do you do with 62 million people? 64 million, what can be done with them? My history in the 30+ years that I've been working in war zones is that people who leave their land want to go back. They always want to go back. They don't forget their land. Some people can't go back because they would be persecuted or killed, and that could be because of their religion or because of their ethnicity or their political association, and they would come under the 1951 Refugee Convention, and there's special protections for them. So they may qualify for asylum as a refugee in another country, and that's one thing. But what do you do with the other 40 million people? That's the question. And to me, this requires greater political input because, as you rightly said, the conflicts of today are protracted. It's not like it's a 2 or 3 year war. These wars are going on 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and they're still going on. I mean, if you look at in Afghanistan and Pakistan today, there's probably still 4 million plus refugees who fled from Afghanistan during the war. They've now pretty much integrated into Pakistan. They've raised their families. They've got their own children. They have their own life. Will they ever go back? I don't know, but a lot of them probably would if the circumstances would allow, and I'm sure there's people leaving Afghanistan today, and there's probably people going back to Afghanistan today. But I think that first you have to look after the life. You have to look after the security for those that qualify for refugee status. You want to try to find locations for them to go. But I don't think that the answers are to move everybody who's displaced. I mean, could you move 60 million people somewhere? Where would you move them? I mean, that's not practical. Those kind of solutions aren't practical. So there's not a clear answer. I don't have a clear answer for it. And the reason I don't is because it's such a complex problem. If I look at the Rohingya today that have been driven out of Myanmar, like I said, I've been there twice since October, and you've got maybe 850,000, some people say 1 million Rohingya. They were driven out of Myanmar. So they've now crossed an international border. Bangladesh wants them to go back. Bangladesh has extended hospitality to them, has given them national forest land to live in. But they have legally designated them as forcibly displaced former residents in Myanmar. And that has become an acronym in the NGO world. So because they're not refugees, IOM is the lead agency, not UNHCR. But UNHCR is there working hand in hand with IOM, managing half of the camp capability. IOM is, let's say, like the coordinating entity over it. But these are complications that can be different with every single conflict. And you've got probably 3 million refugees in Turkey right now. You've got about 1 million in Jordan, about 1.5 million in Lebanon, and they still can't go back into Syria. The fighting in Syria is horrible. Do you move them to another continent? They don't want to go. I mean, they're living they're living in tough circumstances. Nobody likes living in a camp. but it's their land. I mean, you know the power of land in Ethiopia. Land is important. People live and die over land. And the land of your father, you never forget it. That's your land, and you want to go back. And so it's always going to be a management issue. I don't think there's ever going to be just, here's the answer.
I want to go back to your candidacy for IOM's Director General and ask you this question. Do you support an upgrade in IOM's role from related organization to specialized agency within the UN?
So the answer is no, I don't. But let me speak just a little bit about what related organization. So related organization was a formal relationship that was negotiated between the member states of IOM and the United Nations, and it was signed in October of 2016. And this allowed IOM to become a UN agency. It's called a UN-related agency. And by doing that, they have access to the security apparatus at the UN. They have a seat at the table for coordination meetings and planning meetings. And then there's some other business administrative things that they have a view into. And so it's been a year and a half. And a specialized agency is the next rank up of relationship. What IOM has that is very unique is a tremendous field operational capability. The IOM can deliver humanitarian supplies, it can set up camps, it frequently it serves UNHCR to manage camps that are under UNHCR's authority. It can respond to natural disasters, it can do things. And it is clear to me during the campaign as Director General that the member states do not want to see that capability diminished. They want to see that capability get stronger. And the fear is that the more that you get in under the UN umbrella, the bureaucracy would crush down that capability. So there's that concern. But the other thing that I would say is that if you had a child 1.5 years old that was just getting started and he couldn't read like a college graduate in a year and a half, what would you just change it? It requires time. And I think that IOM, it's incumbent, it's a requirement of IOM to fill the shoes that are needed to truly become the UN Agency for Migration. And that's the title that was agreed upon in the paperwork that was signed, IOM, UN Agency for Migration. Now, when you look at migration, what's involved in it? Well, there's knowledge. Okay, so knowledge is fed by data and by best practices and information. And those two together will feed into policy creation. And then the other part, I think, with migration, and this is what the member states like, is the ability for action. So if there are 600,000 Rohingya refugees that come across the border, there's an agency that can go there right now and help. And then I think the third thing that's important is results. And I think that if you have knowledge that leads to action, you should get results, and you have to be able to measure those results. So that's one area that IOM, I see some things growing in that area and being able to quantify and qualify those results.
And specifically, what do you think should IOM's role in the Global Migration Group be?
In the Global Migration Compact?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's for the member states to decide, but the last draft that I read, IOM is only mentioned about 4 or 5 times, so the member states are raising their voice on that. IOM has played really a small technical role in helping to guide the process along in the Global Compact on migration. But whatever that compact comes out being, IOM, I mean, that will become IOM's job to go by that compact. However, that said, I think it's worth noting that it's totally voluntary for every one of the UN states to abide by the compact. So that means that it's just going to be an influence in some way or another on some of the policy. Now, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, it could become something else. But right now, it's a framework. I don't even know that you can call it an agreement. I'm not sure what a compact means, but it's a framework association of ideas that all of the members that agree to it can volunteer to participate in it, in that framework or not. So in a way, it could make things more complicated before it makes things smoother.
Now, you are the U.S. candidate for IOM.
Yes.
How will the current U.S. administration's policy on migration influence your leadership of the IOM?
So I am the U.S. candidate for IOM, and I'm not a U.S. government person. I don't represent the United States government in any way. So my job, if I was the Director General, I will report to, y'all have 169 bosses, the member states.
Member states.
I mean, that would be the board, right? And so my job will be to run IOM according to their wishes, not to represent the U.S. government in it. And but I think at the same time, Ambassador Bill Swing is former Ambassador Bill Swing is the Director General now, and he's done a stellar job over the last 10 years in building the organization. And what I would like to do is to build on that legacy and make IOM the organization that it needs to be for future events, and not just the events that have happened up to now, but the ones that are coming. So the United States is not going to, I don't take the instructions from Washington, D.C. to run IOM. I take it from the member states. But I am an American. I'm proud to be the nominee, the American candidate. And I have always been a voice for people. I don't get in the street with a sign and wave it, but in an office with leaders behind closed doors, I always raise my voice. I always have, and I always will. So having an American in that role, I think, will give access into a sphere of influence.
Wonderful. I want to take a quick departure and mention we're in April now, and April 22nd is the International Earth Day. What are your views on climate change, and where do you see IOM working on this issue?
So my issue, I mean, not my issue, my view, you asked me, on climate change is, yes, there are natural disasters. I've helped people. I've helped people in hurricanes and tornadoes and typhoons and floods and droughts. And I've seen all of that. And I fully acknowledge that they happen and that climate changes. IOM has a set of guidelines in place, strategic objectives, that they would work with member countries to help identify risk to be brought about for climate change, to put mitigation measures in place, even all the way down to evacuation on a temporary basis or on a permanent basis, helping to make emergency preparedness plans. I can support all of those objectives, and I think that they're all wise, and I don't have any problem there.
My questions also go back to the questions that I have raised earlier. What should be the political commitment of countries? Because, for example, international peace Nobel laureates are saying nothing when the Rohingya refugees are displaced from their country, like Aung San Suu Kyi. What should be the role of individuals, prominent individuals, and also countries in mitigating this kind of things?
So IOM deals with migration, not with world politics.
Yeah.
Okay, but I can say that if you were leading an agency that was dealing with migration, you would have to speak to the issues of humanitarian access, to the issues of voluntary return. You would need to speak to some of these issues, but the way that I would do that, I mean, I don't think it's for me to say what countries should do or individuals should do. You know, what I believe is that in the right time, at the right place, I will raise my voice for what I believe is right. And for me, that's never been in a demonstration on a street. It's been when I meet with a head of state and the door's closed, and then I can talk and with leaders, people that can make decisions. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. All of us are called to do different things. And anyway, that's what I feel the way that I should respond. to those kind of issues. I'm avoiding your question a little bit because I can't say what other countries should do. That's up for them to decide, not for me.
What about the funding, the U.S. funding for the International Organization for Migration?
That's a good question. So what I can tell you is that the United States gives about 1/3 of the total budget for IOM. And even though the United States withdrew from the process of the Global Compact on Migration, in the budget that was just signed, I think last week, it was approved by Congress and signed by President Trump. The amount for humanitarian work in there, as I understand it, I haven't seen the detail, but as has been told to me, is higher than it's ever been. And what I also know in speaking to a friend that is in the National Security Council, and I think you can find this online, is the National Security Strategy for the United States on page 42, which was put out in December of last year, states clearly that the United States has been the leader in humanitarian assistance globally and will remain the leader in humanitarian assistance globally. So that's the strategy of the country. That's our national security strategy. So I would take that at face value.
You mentioned God earlier when you spoke, and I want to ask two questions regarding that. One, could you explain why you want to move from a faith-based non-profit organization to an international organization that serves governments? And if you do become the DG, how will your religious faith impact your work?
So my religious faith always impacts my work because I also said earlier that I care about people, and I always have. And I do that because I think that is a special love that God put in my heart for people. I care about people. There's no reason that I would want to go to hard areas of the world and to see horrible suffering. I was in Rwanda in 1994 during the genocide. I was here in Ethiopia during the end of two wars. I've been in war zones all around the world, and I've been in a lot of hard situations here in Africa as well. And I do that not because it's fun, but it's because I care about those people. And so from that perspective, my religious faith will speak into my work. But my religious faith is not going to inhibit me from working with other people at IOM any more than they do anywhere else in the world. I work with people of all faiths all the time. And always will. And so I don't see that having any negative aspect at all.
I mean, we have discussed a lot of complex issues. I want to, before we close the session, I want to see if we can narrow them down, summarize them into a few brief comments or points about what your vision is for IOM.
So can I answer it in two parts?
You can indeed.
So I have done this kind of work for 34 years. Mm-hmm. I've worked extensively in Africa. I've worked extensively in Europe, extensively in Asia. And I'm the only candidate running that has that kind of field experience, that has helped people in their hour of need regardless of what their circumstances were. I'm also the only candidate that has built and managed a large organization. So all of these things together give me a unique set of qualifications. I think that IOM in the future needs to prepare itself for events that are coming in the future, not for events that happened in the past. And those events coming in the future are going to require more attention to the drivers of migration. They're going to require more attention to ensuring the human rights of migrants. They're going to require more attention to helping states manage migration so that migration can truly become safe, orderly, and regular.
And is there anything else you would like to add before we close the show?
So there are 169 countries voting, mm-hmm. and the winner will need 2/3 votes. Uh-huh. And because I have been so involved in Africa, I selfishly want the whole African continent. I believe that up to folks of their own accord, but I do appreciate the support that I'm getting from many different countries, and I appreciate those that are going to vote for the American candidate to encourage their friends to vote for the American candidate as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isaacs, for being on Real Talk USA.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun being here.
Real Talk USA.
It's my house, come on, turn it up.
The hour where the U.S. mission to the African Union comes to you through Afro FM 105.3 to highlight the United States partnership in Africa. Current issues will be discussed. Guests will engage on a variety of topics ranging from politics to jazz. Co-hosted by AUL Solomon of Afro FM and Chris Mead of USAU. The show will air every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. Feel free to participate by sending messages to the USAU social media sites www.usau.usmission.gov or www.facebook.com/USAU and follow USAU on twitter.com/USAU.
Just relax. Welcome to my house.
Real Talk USA.
Welcome to my house. It's my house.